Welcome to Mac's Family Racism Stories, your go-to place for exciting stories and incredible content. If you enjoy what you see, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to support the channel and help us grow. Thank you so much, and let's dive in. Jack Turner had seen flames dance in the dead of night, felt the scorching heat of burning buildings, and faced death more times than he could count. But as he stood in front of his newly purchased home in Salem, Massachusetts, a chill ran down his spine. Not from fire, but from something unseen, lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect neighborhood. The house was old, its wooden frame whispering tales of the past with every creak of the floorboards. The wind howled through the trees, and for a brief moment, Jack thought he heard something, a faint voice, a whisper carried by the breeze. Shaking off the unease, he unloaded his boxes, eager to finally settle down in peace. But peace was the last thing this place would offer him. The next morning, as he sipped his coffee, he noticed them, his new neighbors. Not one or two, but a group of them, standing just beyond his fence, watching. Their expressions were unreadable, a strange mix of curiosity and... was that fear? Then came the knock. Sharp. Measured. Almost rehearsed. Jack opened the door to a woman who looked as if she had stepped out of an old courtroom drama, Nancy Reynolds, president of the HOA. Her smile was tight, her eyes calculating. "Welcome to the community," she said, voice smooth but cold. "We need to discuss the rules." Jack raised an eyebrow. Rules? Something about the way she said it made his gut twist. He had no idea, he had just stepped into a game far darker than he ever imagined. Jack Turner had lived through war zones, had seen men break under pressure, but nothing had prepared him for the battle of wits unfolding in this seemingly quaint New England neighborhood. He sat across from Nancy Reynolds in what could only be described as an unofficial interrogation. The HOA meeting room was dimly lit, the walls adorned with polished plaques and photographs of former presidents, each one staring down at him, as if warning him not to step out of line. Around the table sat 6 members, all dressed too formally for a simple community gathering. Jack sipped his coffee, noticing how every single one of them had their eyes locked on him. Nancy cleared her throat. "You have several violations." Jack almost laughed. "I moved in yesterday." The room remained silent, save for the scratching of a pen from the woman sitting to Nancy's right, recording every word, every reaction. Nancy slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, his truck parked in the driveway, his garbage bins not lined up to community standard, and a red circle drawn around his house. "This is a historically protected area, Mr. Turner," Nancy continued, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the table. "You've already broken 3 regulations." Jack leaned back, arms crossed. "And?" Nancy's expression darkened. "You will comply. Or face the consequences." Jack had faced threats before. But this? This wasn't a simple HOA dispute, this was something deeper, something far more sinister. Jack had dealt with corrupt officials overseas, but nothing prepared him for the cult-like madness of the Silver Pines HOA. That night, he slept lightly, the eerie quiet of the neighborhood unsettling. Something felt off. His instincts screamed at him. Years in law enforcement had trained him to recognize a storm brewing before it struck. And strike it did. The next morning, Jack walked outside to find his truck missing. Not towed, gone. His garbage cans had vanished too, and a bright orange violation notice was plastered on his door like some kind of public execution order. Community standards violation, unauthorized vehicle, improper waste disposal, non-compliance with neighborhood decorum. Jack exhaled through gritted teeth. He felt a presence watching him, and sure enough, across the street, Nancy Reynolds stood on her porch, sipping tea, her expression smug. Beside her, 2 of her lackeys pretended to inspect a clipboard. Jack turned, walking toward her, but before he could say a word, she spoke, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Oh, Mr. Turner. It seems your truck was impounded. And, well, rules are rules. Perhaps if you were more cooperative, things wouldn't be so difficult." Jack clenched his fists. They wanted him to break. To submit. But they had just made a grave mistake. They underestimated the man they were dealing with. Jack knew intimidation when he saw it. His missing truck, the bogus fines, the smug glances from Nancy and her little posse of wannabe enforcers, they were baiting him, hoping he'd lose control. But Jack wasn't some desperate homeowner begging for peace. He was a fighter. Still, the next move from the HOA made his blood boil. That afternoon, as Jack returned from work, he found his driveway blocked off with traffic cones and a massive "condemned by HOA" sign stabbed into his front yard like a medieval decree. His garage? Padlocked. Someone had actually installed a chain and lock on his own damn door. Across the street, Nancy stood with arms crossed, feigning surprise as Jack ripped the sign out of the ground. "Mr. Turner," she cooed, stepping forward. "You've been flagged for serious community violations, and as president of the HOA, I have the authority to." Jack cut her off with a slow, deliberate chuckle. "Authority?" he echoed, stepping closer. "You don't have a shred of legal power. But you are guilty of trespassing and property tampering." Nancy's smile faltered, but she held her ground. "We're simply ensuring compliance. If you refuse, there will be consequences." Jack took out his phone, snapped a picture of the lock, the sign, her, and dialed. "You're right, Nancy. There will be consequences." And for the first time, she looked nervous. Jack had seen some absurd things in his lifetime, but having his own garage padlocked by a suburban cult took the cake. His patience, already hanging by a thread, snapped. He wasted no time. Bolt cutters. One clean snap. The padlock hit the pavement with a pathetic clink. He swung the garage door open dramatically, as if daring the heavens to strike him down. Spoiler alert, they didn't. But Nancy was already storming across the street, her face the color of sunburnt rage. "Mr. Turner, you are violating." Jack raised a hand, cutting her off like a principal shutting down a misbehaving student. "You locked my garage." His voice was calm, too calm. Nancy's cronies hovered behind her, gripping their clipboards like they were shields. Jack pulled out his phone, held it up for effect, and hit play. A crisp, clear voice, Nancy's voice, blared through the speaker. "As president of the HOA, I have the authority to." Jack grinned. "See, Nancy, I recorded our little chat. And funny thing, turns out what you just did is highly illegal." Nancy's smile shattered. "Oh, and I also sent it to my lawyer," Jack continued, stretching like a man without a care in the world. "Should I call the sheriff now, or do you want to do the honors?" The color drained from her face. Victory never tasted so sweet. Jack thought he had seen the peak of HOA insanity, but Nancy, ever the overachiever, proved him wrong. Again. The next morning, sirens blared outside his house. 2 county inspectors, looking way too serious for a suburban visit, stood on his lawn. Jack, still in his robe, coffee in hand, sighed. "Here we go again." "Sir," one inspector said, clipboard at the ready, "we received a report that your home has multiple violations, including illegal modifications, plumbing issues, and," he glanced at his notes, raising an eyebrow, "a potential rat infestation." Jack blinked. A rat infestation? His house was spotless. He turned his gaze to the other side of the street, where Nancy stood, all but vibrating with smug satisfaction. "Let me guess," Jack said, rubbing his temples. "The complaint came from the HOA?" The inspector hesitated. "We can't disclose that information." Jack smirked. "Oh, I think we all know." 2 hours later, after a full inspection that found nothing but a well-kept home and a very pissed-off firefighter, the inspectors officially cleared him of all violations. Jack didn't even hide his grin as he strolled across the street, stopping just inches from Nancy's porch. "You know what's funny, Nancy?" he mused. "You called the county on me, but forgot one tiny detail." Nancy's smugness cracked. Jack leaned in. "Filing false reports is a felony." The way her face drained of color was absolutely priceless. Jack had fought fires, pulled people from burning buildings, and faced death more times than he could count, but watching Nancy Reynolds' empire crumble? That was a different kind of satisfaction. After her failed attempt to weaponize county inspectors, the backlash hit like a wrecking ball. Jack wasted no time filing an official complaint against the HOA for harassment, misuse of authority, and, oh yes, false reporting to government agencies. Turns out, lying to the county? Big mistake. Nancy tried to hold her ground, calling an emergency HOA meeting to defend herself. The room was packed. Neighbors who once whispered in fear now sat upright, their eyes filled with something dangerous, awareness. Jack took his seat front and center, arms crossed, watching as Nancy fumbled through excuses. But then came the bombshell. A county auditor had been digging into HOA funds. And guess what? $40,000 was missing. The room erupted. Gasps. Accusations. Some of Nancy's own supporters turned on her. "Is this true?" someone shouted. Nancy's face twisted in panic. She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is outrageous. A conspiracy. She pointed at Jack, shaking with rage, "he's trying to destroy this community." Jack grinned. "Nah, Nancy. You did that all on your own." 2 sheriff's deputies stepped forward. Real cops. Real badges. Real handcuffs. And just like that, the tyrant of Silver Pines was escorted out, screaming. Jack leaned back, taking a deep, satisfied breath. Peace, at last.